The simulcast changed the wrestling business forever, and that is exactly where we pick up on part 2 of the WCW ECW Invasion. We're going to pick up from the simulcast, take you the whole way through contracts, who was kept, who was not, and we review WWF Invasion 2001, and the Podski starts now.
The Podski with John Baker. For over 1 year, the revolutionary force in audio entertainment.
Ooh, yeah!
Brother.
Let me talk to you! Freak out, freak out!
I just had an out-of-body experience!
Insane in the membrane!
Brother.
Yeah! And I'm here for only one reason, and that's to take it to the limit, yeah!
Somebody stop the damn man!
I'm living on the edge.
Who is your daddy?
Hello and welcome to the Podski. I am your host, Johnny Bakeshow, and ringside with me is Teddy Mongoose. We are back for part 2 of the WCW ECW Invasion. So if you're new here, go back to last week's show, which is part 1. That can be found in the description below, as well as any other reference links if you want to check those out as extra resources that we mention here on the show. We mentioned the Death of WCW Book and the Nitro Book. They're excellent reads. They're in the description below if you're interested. We also want to remind you, subscribers or new listeners, to subscribe to the channel. We are so close to the 400 subscribers tier. And when we get there, we will give you the bonus bio episode of Rick Rude. As you can see, the tiers here on the screen. Subscribing to the channel is the best way to support the channel. And we'll give you these bonus shows as our show of appreciation to you all. So if you joined us last week, we are picking up right where we left off, which is the final Nitro, the simulcast. We're taking you through the summer of 2001 into the Invasion pay-per-view itself, and that's where we'll end the Invasion shows. So let's tighten up the chin straps. Let's dig in our cleats, baby, because Teddy is about to drop some Mongoose reads on us. What is this fallout of the WCW sale and the simulcast, Teddy?
There's a lot of meat on this WCW bone. And before I put my incisors and pierce the skin and get into the flesh, what I do want to say is that John and I, we bend the knee, okay? We recognize and we understand that there are incredible works out there. John mentioned 2 of them with the Nitro Book and the Death of WCW. There's about to be a Vice doc that is coming out here on what killed WCW. And with what we're able to bring in the time frame that's presented to us, we aren't able to match that production value. We don't have live interviews. We don't have any of the other stuff. But what we will give you in place of that is essentially a time capsule into 2001. And so, as John said, we leave with the simulcast, and we are going to then hop, skip, and jump right over to the Invasion pay-per-view. But please check out those other things, because we'll probably break them down at some point in time on this show, cross some notes, see what we thought, all those other things. But please check out those other resources. There's great people out there doing great things, and we want to plug them all. So, as I take my first nibble here, the simulcast leaves off with heel Vince McMahon saying that after he formally acquires WCW, he's going to fire all the talent and he's going to close down the company. Enter.
Here comes the money.
Here we go.
Dave says Shane, instead, as the babyface, attempted to make WCW a babyface organization. He signed the contract to buy the company under Vince's nose and vowed to keep it alive. WCW was made an underdog and survived and portrayed in a babyface light, but not the uncool babyface light it was portrayed as during the NWO era, something that the previous people running the show never understood to do. And that lack of understanding killed its loyal fan base, which, among numerous other reasons, led to the company's free fall from being the most powerful wrestling organization in the world just 3 years earlier. So before we move on, John, how right was Dave here?
He's so right.
It's
You like to
it's
give Dave a hard time about stuff, about him like being wrong about things, but looking back, the amount of home runs that Dave hit over the years, like it's crazy. And it's even crazier to think about in another 20 years. What are we going to think about the stuff that he's saying about right now?
right. And that's one of the major tropes is that like Mabel was the third man, right? Big swing and a miss.
Yeah.
But that was a angle that he got wrong. This is a analysis of the situation on what is going to be an industry changing angle. And we're going to get into this. And it is insane the foresight he has. And the foresight that he has is all backed from previous history and really should like applaud him for that. Do you know what I'm saying? The dude is a true historian. And it's really interesting to dig back through this stuff that was literally written 23 years ago. Okay, so the WWF was hopeful of finalizing a TNN television deal and announcing when the company would restart, meaning WCW, in the final segment of the last Nitro. But that didn't happen.
They were going to reboot right away with WCW?
That was the initial plan, was that as the simulcast was going on and when Shane went babyface, he was going to say, it was a McMahon, but it wasn't Vince, it was Shane. And we're going to be coming to you live on TNN at 8 o'clock on Thursday or whatever. That was the initial plan.
Wow. I did not know that.
Oh yeah, we hit it.
There's so many things that you know about the invasion or the sale of WCW that you literally there's just so much that happened that you don't have no idea of, even nuggets like this.
And the crazy thing about it is that not everything that you read is true, obviously. But where there's so many different things that if you pull the thread, that there's a there.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying? And that's what's wild about this is that if you would have spoken with somebody that was in the WCW camp in late 2000, they would have told you how wrong everybody was. And if you spoke to somebody that was in the WWF camp in mid 2001 about the ideas for WCW reboots and everything else, which we'll get to, they would have told you how wrong you were. And then all those things end up fleshing out to have, I don't want to say truth, but a there. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's what's really interesting about it.
It is. Man, that's a good
So
one.
Dave calls the last Nitro, quote, a 10-day period so momentous that it will end with likely the biggest or second biggest money show in the history of the industry, end quote, which is where we're going to get to today. With being the big invasion show. So not only do we have the big story of the sale, but there's numerous other things that are stemming from it. One of which is where wrestling stands with the American television community. And that's going to have a much deeper impact on the business as a whole. So the television industry's negative perception of pro wrestling is what led to what looks to be a single ownership monopoly of the major league industry in this company in pro wrestling for the first time in its history. Basically, what we're saying there is there has been NWA, WWF, WWF, WCW, ECW, Memphis, Mid-South. There's Georgia Championship Wrestling. There's been territories everywhere for as long as there's been television. And now with WCW folding, this is it. There's nothing else.
That is so
true. And so there's more meat on the bone here. I'll get to in a second. Eric Bischoff always felt that even if he was unable to get control of WCW, he could get backers in place and start a company from scratch because there was enough talent that simply isn't going to work for the WWF for whatever reasons, largely because some of it the WWF simply wouldn't want. But the inability to secure television not only shut the door on Fusion buying WCW, but on anyone starting out and being a significant competitor. And John, the death of WCW is literally a result of them being unable to procure television. And so here we are.
Television is king right now. Content rights are king. Even 20 some years later, it's still, you got to have television or you're not going to survive.
And you saying that, it's, we've said it multiple times in the last couple of weeks. Everybody says that AEW's future is going to literally be hinging on this television deal.
Mm-hmm.
Will you be profitable? It doesn't matter that there's 1,800 people coming to a collision. It doesn't matter that, they are year over year down in this demographic or whatever. If they get the right deal, they're a profitable company.
And the same thing said about WWE even 5, 6, 7 years ago. They weren't selling out buildings. They had dead crowds, and they were making the largest TV deals in history at the time. And look at where they are now. It's all gamer runs.
I guess to piggyback off of that, for modern day WWE, you have them doing these international shows, which have, by all metrics, the lowest interest in history. That Backlash show, Google searches down, streams down, everything else, but they're sold shows, man. They're on the Peacock. Peacock's paying them the same amount, whether there's 1,000 people that watch or 10 million, and they're getting the gates from these international communities. Like it's a broken business model in the favor of the business that's running the shows. You know what I'm saying? It's really crazy.
It is.
So before we move on, John said it before, want to say it again. Death of WCW, Artie Reynolds and Brian Alvarez and Guy Evans' Nitro books. Check them out. I'm going to allude to the Death of WCW, but before I do, John, we are of different wrestling generations. Okay, so I didn't learn about this until I read the Alvarez book in terms of the first invasion. So were you aware of the invasion that happened in the 80s with Jim Crockett Promotions and Mid-South Wrestling?
No, I am actually not aware of that.
This is literally a perfect sec. Dave notes, Brian Alvarez writes in his book, and it's in the early chapters whenever they're going into basically like Ted Turner's Baby Boy or something like that is going to be this section about the field invasion angle that happened once prior. And it's insane that Dave is writing this out in 2001 in live time. And then Alvarez is going to write about it with the retrospective eyes a couple of years later. Dave writes in relation to Jim Crockett Promotion purchasing Mid-South from Bill Watts. Instead of doing the natural promotion versus promotion matchup, the winners treated the losers in the booking as, well, losers. The idea was to keep the organization separate for a while, much like the idea today is, and eventually build toward a Super Bowl of wrestling on pay-per-view, again, much like the idea of today is. So initially, JCP buys Mid-South, we're going to keep them separate, and then we're going to bring them together for a Super Bowl later on.
Mm-hmm.
The initial idea here is, we've bought WCW, we're going to keep them separate, and then we're going to clash them together later on. Okay, you following along here?
That all makes logical sense.
Okay. But instead, immediately after the sale, Crockett mid-card wrestlers were sent to UWF TV tapings and quickly became champions. Mixed shows were booked under the UWF TV banner, with Crockett wrestlers being portrayed as the biggest stars, which, quite frankly, on a natural basis, they were. Pretty soon, on shows in the old UWF territory, the UWF World title would be 5 matches down from the top in a mid-card position, below all the Crockett headliners, and the title was never portrayed on TBS as anything close to the belt that Ric Flair held. And many in Crockett Promotions felt it as an insult that the last UWF champion, Steve Williams, who departed the promotion with the belt meaningless and never being asked to use it, was even called world champion on an NWA television show. Aside from Sting, who caught fire out of nowhere in the legendary 1988 television match with Ric Flair, sort of like Bill Goldberg did a decade later, the UWF wrestlers went nowhere, And the name quickly disappeared, as did the unacquired talent used as filling guys who could have actually freshened up the stale top of Crockett's shows. So basically what we had here was the UWF versus JCP thing could have been a thing, and it was squandered by having the JCP guys come on there being the superstars, the UWF guys being the, B players. And sooner than later, it was exactly what it was. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's crazy how history repeats itself.
I was just going to say, I hate to call it foreshadowing, but so having blown the opportunity only a few months later, amid financial problems, largely due to stagnation of the talent at the top, bad finishes at house shows, and too many turns and angles to where they meant nothing, Crockett himself went out of business. The interpromotional angle was killed almost as quickly as it was started. So here we have Invasion 1 failed. Okay. Dave says, what can be learned? The biggest one, the war is over and it's time to make money. And then he notes, this is easy in the short run, trickier in the long run. They need to remember there's no competition. And then he puts the footnote on that McMahon and Hogan have already fallen victim to this by burying their competition in the past, by fumbling having Ric Flair handed to them in 1991. They never put him on Hogan's level, and he was almost always seen as the opposition, even though he literally worked for them now.
This is literally is like Dave had the crystal ball and he's just working it right now.
It's nuts, man. It is
insanity. He literally basically called it word for word the day after it happened, literally the week after it happened.
Yeah, this writing is from the week after the last Nitro.
This is for April 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. And the simulcast was the 26th of March.
Yes. That's what I mean. Like, it is that instantaneous, man. And so the big idea is you own them now. Make the money. The reality is that, and this has been obviously the poison pill with Crockett, with UWF prior. And then here is that now that you've acquired this talent, they aren't your talent. So you don't treat them the same, when in reality, you would make the most money if you treated them the same.
Yes, you would.
And especially because you own them now. That's the most important lesson, is they're yours. It's not the competition.
No.
You're only hurting yourself.
Oh my gosh. It's not a hard concept to wrap your head around, but they make it so difficult.
It's all ego, man. So we go into the television situation. So last year, when WCW was first put on the market, negotiations ran in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And there wasn't even a consideration that the product wouldn't keep two valuable TV prime slots on two of the strongest cable stations. Viacom was bidding at the same time for the valuable WWF franchise, and there were more stations that wanted big league wrestling than there was big league wrestling. Fast forward to mid-2001. This past week, TBS and TNT canceled wrestling. So it goes from there's more companies that want wrestling than there is wrestling companies to one of the big TV stations cancels one of the big companies.
Man. It's crazy how everything in business just flips like that.
So fast, dude. Especially media. And you see that today. There's things that catch and that fizzle out. Where's the Tiger King right now? So Fusion Media Ventures, the company that had announced in January as the buyer for WCW, was still in the game trying to buy the company. All they had to do was clear a cable outlet. ECW found out months earlier, which is what caused Paul Heyman to literally throw in the towel, that the whole landscape changed, that there were no suitors. So ECW was already there, found out, nobody wants us. You and I talked last week and said, the problem with ECW was they were the indie band that got big, right?
Yeah. Yes.
They were too big for the people that wanted them to be indie, but they were too indie for the people that like big stuff.
Yes.
So they were sort of a man with no country. This is different though. So USA Network publicly washed their hands of wanting wrestling, didn't even want to negotiate. The E Network had no interest. And after a last-ditch attempt to make a deal with Fox for FX failed, Fusion pulled out, which is what led to the fire sale of the company. So Fusion was all in. TV gets pulled for they get canceled, and then the other companies pull the rug out from under them, and that's why Fusion is out.
That's really interesting of the networks that you mentioned, because USA is running wrestling currently. Now they will be next year still, not on Raw, but with SmackDown is on Fox right now. Interesting network is the E Network.
Yeah. Okay, so the saddest reality of the past week was not that one man now owns all of wrestling, but that the barriers of entry to competition are such that economically he can't be challenged. A national product, and to really make money, you need national exposure for the licensing, merchandising, as well as the lucrative pay-per-view possibilities needs to be on a national cable outlet, and no cable station is interested.
It's the problem with monopolies.
Yeah, and dude, none were interested until TNA.
Yeah.
And even TNA was so little brother. And now you have AEW. And the problem with AEW is that on the run up that they were on, that once WWE refound their stride, their machine is so much bigger that you can't compete.
Yeah.
So AEW was able to be like, look, better creative, better stories, better matches. Once the WWF or WWE, turn into better creative and better stories, as long as the matches are close, which they are, then it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like you, whenever you and Andretti went to that Mania and went to all those shows last year, you guys said out loud that this is literally big and little brother. There are two big differences between the companies, and it's only been on, display at the most grand scale since then. The gap hasn't closed.
Yeah, and if you go to a Dynamite and then you go to a Raw, you'll see some differences. Like there's obviously a little bit more production, obviously, with Raw than there is on a Dynamite. They're similar, but seeing a WrestleMania, it's not even a level playing field. They are so much bigger. And going to back-to-back WrestleManias, like we were both just at WrestleMania 40. It is not even close. It's not a competition.
Yeah. And that's the environment. The more intimate environment and seeing a great match does not have the same appeal to the mass audience that the Hogan Andre, Cody Roman has to the masses. There is just a difference. And look, man, I hope with all my might that Will Ospreay catches on and that they end up being a serious number two, because serious number twos only make number ones better. The only reason WWF or WWE, the only reason WWE is even relevant right now is because they had the heat turned up on them.
Yes.
And that's a good thing. And this same thing happened in 97, and I'm sure it'll happen again. Like the competition is a good thing, because when there is none, which we'll get to at the end of this, because it's dead, you end up with suffer and succotash, right?
Yes, you do.
You end up with great balls of fire.
Yeah.
You end up with that stuff.
Yep.
And that is what it is. So no cable station is interested. So there's no interest in the cult favorite ECW. There's no interest in the brand name WCW, even with big names like Hulk Hogan and Bill Goldberg on the roster. And there's no interest in a startup that can't provide the marquee names that are already under contract. So if you're not interested in the cult favorite, you're not interested in the legacy company, you're obviously not going to be interested in a startup.
Yep.
So they're literally saying right now that their competition is squashed, at least for the near future. And that ends up being literally for the next almost 20 years.
Yeah.
So exactly how good faith the negotiations were with the WCW side is still a question. You had texted me about this before.
I did. I've told you about this guy you're about to mention. I've mentioned him so many times over the last couple of weeks when we were prepping for this show.
Yep. So it is believed that Brad Siegel of Time Warner and Stuart Snyder of the WWF, who formerly worked for Time Warner, began negotiating the deal in late February. Since their previous deal fell apart because of WWF's exclusive television contract with Viacom, even before Jamie Kellner made his statement killing wrestling on the station, they must have been leaning in that direction based on an opening of the serious aspect of the negotiations opening back up. Snyder was told in negotiations weeks before it came out publicly that they were not going to sell to Fusient, even though Fusient was still negotiating with the idea that they were likely to close the deal. John, your take.
I heard the name Stu Snyder for a long time, and this show is dropping after the What Killed WCW. And I have heard that Stu Snyder was interviewed for this thing. And apparently, I mean, like literally there's nothing new that we can learn from, but nobody knows what Stu Snyder knows. And I have a feeling that that is a ringer for this entire production that they've done, is that Stu Snyder is going to reveal something that even he might have backhanded, just screwed the negotiations for Fusient Media, or was he acting in good faith or was he? I have a feeling we're going to find that out in that documentary.
It'll be interesting because listening to Observer Radio today,
yeah,
Dave saw the first 15-minute teaser, whatever came out. Alvarez is so pissed off because they obviously didn't interview him or whatever. So he didn't even really want to talk about it. But Dave was basically said that like it's nothing that we don't know, and they're talking to people that we know that won't always tell the truth. But we'll give it a shot, right? We'll see what they say. And I think that you might be onto something where the actual landmine could come from him. Like there's nothing that's going to be said by Bischoff or any of the other people that they're talking to that we haven't already heard more than one time and more than one platform.
Yeah.
But he's the one, man. He is the key.
So if you are watching that and you're coming here, I've been on Stuart Snyder for literally over a year. I had these Invasion notes back in August of 2023, and was Stu Snyder a plant? That was my number one bullet point for the show. So we didn't dive into further on Stu Snyder, but Stu Snyder is a very important, very unknown figure in all of this.
Unknown, behind the shadows.
Yes.
That might have been a big, big deal. So the WWF purchased the name and trademarks of WCW, which would include rights to the name Nitro, the extensive videotape library, and the contracts of 24 of the generally lower paid wrestlers. Time Warner would still have to fulfill the remaining contracts as well as be responsible for the outstanding lawsuits and make goods for Nitro and Thunder underperforming in the ratings. But even WWF, the entity that turned TNN around through the popularity of Raw, was unable to secure a good time slot for the WCW show. The new WCW weekly program, check this out, brother, will air Saturday nights from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. No start date has been finalized, but Shane McMahon has told WCW wrestlers in Panama City that they can expect to get it on the air in the next 6 to 8 weeks. It would have been far more beneficial to try to work out a deal with MTV to air the WCW show in the heat spot, which, please, everybody listening, go back into the 99 episodes of the show that we've done where we talk about how on serious fire Heat is.
He's literally doing so good.
So here's where Heat is now. Since the show is of little value to WWF, is sputtering in the ratings, but is still in a primetime spot where it can draw from every age group as opposed to the Saturday night late spot, which is forced to target a far more narrow demographic. Vince McMahon was telling people in Cleveland that the time slot was to allow them to go head-to-head with Saturday Night Live as revenge for Lorne Michaels dissing the XFL.
Wow.
And so that was literally, that's the simulcast. Him saying that in Cleveland, that's happening during the simulcast. Him walking around swinging his D, being like, here we come.
Wow.
There is no long-term, or for that matter, short-term battle plan other than to produce a television show. Talent is largely up in the air. The working idea is to tape the television for every Wednesday night so that top WWF officials can be there after doing Monday and Tuesday night tapings for the WWF. The WCW brand would be kept separate with, at this point, wrestlers only doing Wednesday tapings. There are no plans for house shows or pay-per-view shows under the WCW brand at this point. The idea is that when the WCW brand gets hot enough, then they would start doing touring and pay-per-views, but there is no timetable. And Dave says, this is where it gets tricky. The working idea is that no WCW wrestlers would appear on Raw or SmackDown. However, there would be a few WWF wrestlers that would appear on the WCW television show. Most likely, the WWF wrestlers would be portrayed as, quote, the stars, end quote, on WCW television because they would come from the Strong Show, which immediately would start casting existing WCW wrestlers as WWF's, quote, B team. Dude, they've learned nothing. This is the issue that we went through with JCP and UWF.
Exactly. And there's no way that Vince was going to do exactly what he wanted to do. And it's crazy the amount of people that's surrounding him, like Pat Patterson, Gerald Briscoe, Bruce, all of those guys, to say, hey, this was already done before. Don't make the same mistake. If Dave can point that out in 2001, those guys certainly could have.
Right. And especially Bruce. Like, he's the really important one here is because he was a territory guy.
Yeah.
You know, he was down in Houston and it's crazy. But again, Dave always says that Vince said he never wanted yes men. And then everybody that he brought to him they weren't yes men until they were embarrassed enough that they were just yes men.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like when you did speak out of turn, when you did give your own ideas, whatever, you got buried and then you just said, you know what? Great idea, Vince.
Yes.
And so,
true.
Yeah. Obviously, the idea is not to keep them separate forever. And the promotion versus promotion angle, in theory, should be a huge moneymaker, but not until WCW's perception is rebuilt. The trick now is to rebuild WCW to where it is seen as a threat and a near equal to the WWF. But you don't want to kill your golden goose, which is the WWF, in doing so. Even then, it becomes tricky because you can run the angle for too long until, like the WCW versus the NWO, it runs its course and one side has to win ultimately, and that side that wins eventually needs to be the WWF.
Mm-hmm.
And the WCW's problem was they didn't let Sting win, right? Yeah. Is that and look, man, I grew up as a Wolfpack guy, right? So the NWO was already beating a dead horse, and I love me some Wolfpack.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I love me some Wolfpack was that it was K-Dog on the microphone and Big Sexy, Sting. Like the people that they had there really made that group. But what that storyline should have been was Sting beating Hulk Hogan clean, the WCW wins.
Yes.
And if that wasn't going to be it, then Goldberg beating Hogan needed to be it.
Mm-hmm.
They had two shots and neither of them happened, right?
Right.
They just kept the other side alive for too long. And then all of a sudden we ended up with NWO 2000. And nobody wants to go NWO 2000.
Nobody loves NWO 2000.
No.
Maybe Andretti.
No. Yeah, perhaps. It will be very hard, and it may be next to impossible to rebuild the WCW brand for more than a short flame given these limitations. A great television show every week would overcome a lot of those perceptions, but anything less than great television, particularly in that time slot, is going to be seen as an afterthought show, as the majority of fans will skip. The ratings for Heat as the current C show over the past year have shown that. And Heat airs in a primetime spot as opposed to a time slot with a large percentage of existing WWF audience, which is too young, and a solid percentage of whatever carryover the WCW audience, which is too old, are unlikely to watch, meaning the 11 to 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
A hot show will find a way to draw viewers, and there will be initial curiosity. But, and this is so crazy, dude, how this fits in. The XFL also showed how long initial curiosity can carry a television show. Of course, pro wrestling is Vince McMahon's field of expertise, but the majority of WWF fans also choose to skip Heat.
Mm-hmm.
And we finish with this one before we get into who's coming and who's not. McMahon at a meeting in Cleveland, when talking about the purchase of WCW, told the wrestlers that nobody needed to worry because the grosses would be bigger than ever and that everyone would make more money than ever when they got to the interpromotional matches. He also said that he would have to rebuild WCW to be an equal to the WWF to get the feud ready. Also noted, the plan is to revive ECW as a brand name for an angle, probably within the week. So, John, that's a lot of business, a lot of BTS, behind the scenes talk going on here. After all that, are you ready to talk contract sitchies before we get into where we're going to get to, which is this Invasion show?
Yes, I'm so excited to hear about these contracts because I know before Chris Harrington used to have this all on the internet, and I think that Google Sheet's been taken down.
I didn't know that. Okay. This is what the Observer knew on April 2nd. So talent under contract, and these have been retained. Lance Storm, Chuck Palumbo, Sean O'Hare, Mark Jindrak, Mike Awesome, Elix Skipper, Shane Helms, Shannon Moore, Stacy Keebler, Chavo Guerrero, Mike Sanders, Hugh Morris, Sean Stasiak, Kaz Hayashi, and Yun Yang, which is Jimmy Wang Yang, and Billy Kidman.
All right. What a crop of guys.
Well, you know what, man? There's a group here that I remember getting shots.
Yeah.
And shots, not just one, shots in that early Ruthless Aggression era.
Yeah, and these guys, I'm glad you brought that up because I was getting ready to say some of these guys are going to be hanging around for next week when we talk about Bad Blood 04 and later in the month when we talk about Great American Bash 04.
Yep. So Dave says all these wrestlers were picked up because they had 90-day cycles, which means they could be cut from their current deal and in most cases will, and will then be renegotiated with the WWF and Jim Ross. It doesn't guarantee that all are in the plans, just that their deals are low enough, and the WWF has a clause in the contract where they will be given time to be evaluated, cut, and then offered a new deal under the WWF terms. While not a guarantee that all will be wanted for the new WCW, it is believed that the majority will at least be given new offers. Of that group, it appears the WWF is highest on Kidman, Helms, and Chavo Guerrero is in decent shape, but he's far smaller than the WWF wrestlers at that time that they've given a major push to. Crazy that Helms is there, man.
I love the
and
Hurricane.
Billy Kidman got himself a push too, but Hurricane.
I'm a big Hurricane guy.
Right. So Awesome and Storm are the closest things on that list to what the WWF would perceive as main events, but Storm doesn't quite have the size that the WWF likes in its headliners, and Mike Awesome has spectacular moves, but limitations. Potential standouts based on what the WWF looks for are Palumbo and O'Hare, which, looking at those guys, of course, they look like WWE guys who aren't ready to be major players, but in a year or two could be, and this is crazy, probably Keebler. She only ends up being the biggest deal ever, right?
Right.
In many of these cases, Palumbo, O'Hare, Jindrak, Skipper, Stasiak, Yang, and even possibly more would all benefit from working regularly in one of the developmental territories because they won't progress in projection, working ability, and interviews fast enough doing 1 to 3 minute television matches per week. This was not the original plan, but we're told it's something that's being considered. Again, man, it's cool that all these guys end up getting an actual shake. And maybe not all of them, but for the most, a lot of them end up getting a fair shake at this.
Mm-hmm.
So those that may be on the list of people being kept: Disco Inferno, Reno, Johnny the Bull, Jason Jett, The Wall, Lash LaRue, Kiwi, Jamie Noble, Evan Courageous, Kid Romeo, Norman Smiley. So WWF bought 24 contracts, and we have the name of 16 above. So out of what I read to you, there was a guaranteed list in that first crop, and then that second crop made up the rest of the 24.
Okay.
So there's 16 to 17 names in that first crop, and then the rest are made up of that second one that I read to you.
Not a great roster that you bought.
Yeah. Yep. So one would think of the other 8 that they would come from that list, since they were not all major money contracts and they all have 90-day cycles to be negotiated. The only one out of this list that he basically says taking a flyer on or have a question about is The Wall, because he says his size is WWF, but with his ability, But
Yeah.
he does say the odds are that he'll get a chance. He does note that Jet won over a lot of people in WCW, being a guy with no buildup, performing in front of crowds that have become disenchanted with the product. But he would always, by the end of the match, bring the crowd to his feet. And I believe that he was in one of those matches from Greed that you watched that got you going.
He was on Greed and he was on Guilty as Charged.
Yeah, there you go. So Heyman is high on Noble, who is small but an underrated worker. Obviously, Paul Heyman would be high on Jamie Noble, dude.
Oh, yeah.
Because Heyman has the vision.
Hell yeah.
Romeo has excellent charisma and a great theme, both rare commodities for WCW underneath talent, and is a good worker. And then he says Smiley, because of his age, will have a tough time being retained. So that is the most likely to be retained. Why and why not?
Right.
Wrestlers WWF doesn't appear to want: Rick Steiner, Jim Duggan, Bam Bam Bigelow, Stevie Ray, Animal, Jeff Jarrett, Lex Luger, Buff Bagwell, Dustin Rhodes, Sid Vicious, Medeja, Miss Jones, David Flair, Chronic, and Vampiro.
That's a list. I'd rather have those guys than the guys they actually kept.
I'm glad. That's a wonderful seg. Okay. So here's a little bit of insight as to why those ones would be on this list. So this is bullet pointed. There was a meeting held this past week with some of the main creative forces in WWF. While we've only been given a sketchy indication as it regards to everyone, every name except Bigelow, Vicious, Flair, Duggan, and Ray were names that we specifically were told were in agreement that they didn't want. So Bigelow, Vicious, Flair, Duggan, and Ray might still be on the table. Dude, if they'd have brought Hacksaw back for one more janitor run in 2001,
you'd have been to the moon.
Oh, to the moon. McMahon on the show apparently told people that he was going to basically fire some people, Jarrett, Luger, Bagwell, and Animal in particular, right on television. And he certainly indicated as much on various vignettes. Nobody in WCW knew what to make of it. Jarrett all night had to wonder whether or not it was a work or a shoot when McMahon said he'd spell Double J, double gone. Shane McMahon, however, told all wrestlers that they would be starting with a fresh slate. However, at the meeting, that definitely wasn't the case, and the company expressed no interest in anyone they felt would hurt the relatively harmonious locker room that they finally got with the WWF. And the strong feeling is that Luger and Bagwell buried themselves if they ever had chances in these past few weeks. Go back to last week if you haven't heard about that one. The women on this list are simply there because the word is WWF wasn't interested in any of the women on the roster except for Keebler. Names at that meeting that were also given a thumbs down at that time were Scott Steiner, Conan, Rey Mysterio Jr., and Kevin Nash. We'll
Wow.
get there. Now we'll get there, brother. So Jarrett's a good worker, but he's paying for holding Vince McMahon up for almost $200,000 in his last night to drop the IC title to China when he jumped when his friend Vince Russo was given the WCW creative position.
That's perfect you mentioned that because we're literally covering that in October. In a few months, you will hear all about Jeff Jarrett holding up Vince for money.
Okay. So Vince has been waiting since the first episode of Nitro to get back at Luger, and on last night's episode said that the Lex Express has run out of steam. Here's what's crazy, man. Rhodes didn't leave the WWF on good terms, and the story that McMahon told about Rhodes wanting to take the Goldust character even further and get implants was true, as he made that suggestion before his falling out and then signing with WCW, which Bruce Pritchard has confirmed later on that he was willing to go there. He basically collected a huge check while management couldn't figure out anything to do with him in WWF. Legal blocked WCW's attempt to make him like his Goldust character. And so because of all that, legal rigmarole, Dustin is not in their favor, but we get Tourette's Goldust soon enough.
Yes, we do.
Bagwell, like Luger, epitomizes much of what is wrong with WCW. When McMahon brought up several of the WCW names, the response to Bagwell, a lot of cheers, was something of a surprise. With his WCW contract running out, Bagwell pitched WWF on coming in, and they expressed no interest a little more than a month ago. Whether or not that crowd response will change Vince's ideas is unknown, but it is known that most of the key people in management view him as an average worker with a better than average charisma, but his out of the ring attitude is a disaster. And so there's the whole Tacoma incident we'll get to, right?
Yes.
Chronic's gimmick is a copy of the APA, which the WWF already has. And I put it here in parentheses. Oh boy, that Brothers of Destruction match.
Oh my God.
So I guess they got learned real fast who the APA was.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? You ain't BSK, you're getting BEATDOWN. The next group, Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, Mysterio Jr., and Conan, were not looked upon favorably at the same meeting, with the idea that they all had bad attitudes and they weren't looking to add any locker room problems. Shane Douglas may also fit in the category, but it's just speculation. Of the four, Nash, who's 42 at that time, is in a different category anyway, in that he doesn't want to come in, and he would be a fool to come in at this time. Nash has 10 months remaining on a contract that pays him $1.625 million a year. If he were to ask for a buyout from the Time Warner to get his release, he would give up $800,000 in guaranteed income over the next 10 months to come in. Probably double what he'd earn as his downside in the next 10 months from the WWF.
Literally no reason for him to get off his couch.
No, and you wonder why these guys weren't there. Why would you? No one would, right? So Scott Steiner's two outbursts are off the script on television, which caused one suspension, as well as physical intimidation of people backstage, was enough to sour the WWF higher-ups on him. He was professional as could be and doing the job for Booker T, clean with the Uranage, dropping the WCW title on the final Nitro. Also, with the exception of Goldberg, he got the biggest reaction when Vince McMahon asked the fans if they wanted him, something Booker T, who the WWF was figuring to be the biggest star for them all out of the WCW group, didn't get. Mysterio Jr. being put in this category was a bigger shock. Several former WCW wrestlers went to bat for him, with Stephanie McMahon at the MSG meeting asking the same question. She told them that they had heard that he had a bad attitude, which his former co-workers denied was the case. In checking with people in WCW who shared locker rooms with him, nobody concurred with that, and all said the opposite, which is why his name was the biggest surprise. So weird, because Mysterio doesn't come in until 2002.
Yeah, he doesn't come in until, it's really weird.
So there is some strange heat here. Conan wasn't brought in because of Max Moon heat. So Vince was still pissed that they put a lot of money into the Max Moon character, and Conan quit coming because the Mexican economy was booming and they were all making a lot of money down there in Mexico. And then whenever things started to go down, he hopped over to WCW and left Vince with whoever was Max Moon. So the last group is question marks with those that we haven't covered or with big contracts. So Sting, DDP, Alex Wright, Canyon, the Cat, Ernest the Cat Miller is somehow on this list.
He had a big contract? Seriously?
Yeah. Ric Flair, Booker T, and Bill Goldberg. So let me just say this one more time. Sting, DDP, Alex Wright, Canyon, Ric Flair, Booker T, Bill Goldberg, the Cat.
One of these things is not like the other.
Yeah, holy cow, man. So Sting has about a year left on his deal, which pays about $2 million per year. The Time Warner policy on buying out contracts, 30 cents on the dollar to those that are owed more than $1.5 million, could cost him $1.4 million, far more than he could possibly make in the WWF, since the talent is likely to only make their downside base since they won't be working pay-per-view or road shows for the foreseeable future. And that's an important thing too, is that at this point in time, there's only downside guarantees. There aren't guaranteed contracts.
Yeah.
So if they told these WCW guys, you might not be on the road, you're not going to be doing pay-per-view, like you're only going to be doing one TV show, every week or whatever, then these guys don't want to be making $500 a week or whatever. That makes a lot more sense too.
Yeah, especially whenever you're going to be making $2 million a year. Like, why would you ever do that?
Exactly. So Dave says he would be a fool to ask for a buyout to get released from his contract to go to the WWF. DDP, who turns 46 or 47, depending on who you believe, next week, is a damn good worker and there is interest in him. I love that, depending on who you believe. Like he's like a Cuban pitcher or something like that.
I think that they're actually, he does not know when his actual birth date is.
Really?
Yeah, that's actually a shoot. They do not know when his actual date of birth is.
So that's why he says, and here's me, 2 weeks from 60.
Yep.
He's working a little bit, huh?
Working a shoot, baby. Bang.
However, he's in a similar situation as Sting, although it could probably cost him in the range of $750,000 to ask for a buyout, which again is a figure that he's not going to make up working the quote new WCW end quote schedule. However, friends say that he may take the year off to become a motivational speaker and collect his WCW contract. Dave says, even though he could have been making the rounds then, and then they end up using it against him with Positively Page, Dave says, I have little doubt for a run on top against top WWF talent, Page would ask for a buyout, but it might not be the prudent thing. Dave saw the writing on the wall, dude. He knew that Dally couldn't stay at home.
No, there's no way that Uncle Dally was staying home.
No. Booker T wasn't on the list because of his high contract, believed to be $750,000 per. Of all the wrestlers in WCW except Bill Goldberg, WWF is believed to be highest on him as a top star. He's expected to be the first guy given the chance to be a top guy, which leads us to, and this is our swan song here, the most intriguing person and the man with the most potential to draw monster business, Goldberg. Immediately, when the sale was made and people started to talk about interpromotional matches, it was Goldberg versus Austin, Goldberg versus Rock, Goldberg versus Triple H. The constant was Goldberg. Goldberg has 2.5 years and more than $2 million per. Truth is, if he were given the monster push because of the potential of those dream matches, he would likely be worth more than that to the WWF. But they aren't going to guarantee it, because doing so would upset the entire salary structure. That monster push would also upset some of the apple carts because he is going to have to spear and squash everyone moving up the line, or his box office value will be ruined before he gets to those big matches. The WWF will find out who really are team players in this situation when top guys are asked to lay down in 2 minutes with no funny business to get him ready for Austin or whomever the money guy is at that point. Goldberg also has a rep for not wanting to do jobs, being that the one job that he did hurt his career badly and wanting to do things his way, which isn't something that fits well with the WWF. Most WCW wrestlers don't think he'd last in the WWF The strong betting line is that, and here's where Dave has his crystal ball, the WWF doesn't attempt to make him the big offer they'll need to if they really want him, and he'll continue to collect until late 2003, which is right about the time that we see him.
Yes, he doesn't come in until the night after WrestleMania 19.
Which is in 2003, so it's not
Early,
late 2000.
that's early. So that is as deep a dive as we have time for as far as the landscape of Major Pro Wrestling is concerned with the purchase of WCW. So, Mongoose, we're going to go full Star Trek and go maximum warp into June 2001. Can you tee us up for the show before the big show, King of the Ring 2001?
I got you, man. So for the July 2nd, 2001 Wrestling Observer newsletter. And John, we had so much hashtag Mongoose reads in the beginning here, right? So much of it. And so I get ready to just put the ball on the tee, let you see that back swing, while you have your head down, you follow through and you send it down the fairway. And the first thing that I happen to read is, with business at a crossroads, Vince McMahon made the ultimate ballsy move starting in just a few weeks, unless plans change, and they do on a daily basis. Raw on TNN will be renamed WCW Raw.
I can't even believe that sentence. I can't believe it. That's a sentence.
Dude, all I wanted to do was just get to King of the Ring, right?
I know.
That was it. My whole intention was to just get to King of the Ring. And then I read that. And so TNN officially got the word on 6/22, although McMahon had the basic ideas formulated many weeks ago of having one existing primetime show be labeled with the WCW brand and the other be a WWF brand. McMahon's feelings were that the WWF versus WCW will have to be promoted as both being equals to be able to create a separate entity and drive the same type of successful revenue streams when it comes to merchandising, licensing, ticket sales, pay-per-views, etc. As the negotiations fell through for the original 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. time slot on Saturday nights on TNN, McMahon felt that, or even if those negotiations hadn't fallen through, that if the WCW was given that time slot, it would immediately establish them as a secondary company. So McMahon, looking back, says, oh, this was a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was also a question of adding another $350,000 weekly expense, as well as the time constraint problem on a busy staff for a third day every week for taping new television. Exactly how the storyline explaining this will go is uncertain, but the basic plans are, the idea is that when Shane gets control of Raw, that it will be the big prize because it signifies that in the end, Vince lost the all-important Monday Night War, not to Ted Turner, but to Shane. These guys, man, you wonder why there was a McMahon in every corner.
For real.
Theoretically establishing him and his team as the big players for taking the thing that Vince worked for the hardest, and it was taken away from him. WWF will use Smackdown as its primary outlet, while Raw is seen by many as the priority of the two shows. Smackdown most weeks draws a slightly larger audience on UPN, 89 million homes, that have larger U.S. penetration than TNN, which is in 81 million homes, even though it doesn't look that way because the difference in network numbers versus cable numbers, SmackDown most weeks realistically draws a larger percentage of its potential homes as an audience than Raw does. The ultimate goal is to make the WCW brand an independent touring entity, running 4 shows a week, running a Saturday through Monday schedule, probably in mid-sized arenas, as well as eventually monthly pay-per-view events. Dude, I'm not even reading the rest of this. John, I'm so mad because this is Ring of Honor.
Yes.
And AEW. Like, everything wrong with Ring of Honor and AEW is everything wrong with this, is everything wrong with what Dave said happened, what was wrong 20 years before this.
I know.
Nobody ever learns, dude.
No, they never listen. They never think. It's insanity.
Oh my gosh. All right. So the last thing is, it is uncertain of this timetable, but there are tentative plans to get this underway by the fall. A lot depends on the response to the early WCW Raw tapings and how quickly tickets sell to gauge whether sufficient demand is there to run a full-time touring schedule. So, dude, what we have here is AEW buys Ring of Honor, and instead of them making it a true separate brand and not one that competes, but being a true separate brand a la NXT, they sandwich it in between their actual content, which goes into them saying about making ROH guys seem like B players, which it does.
It does.
And then we have the problem of the WCW guys being inserted as B players immediately into a new company. You want to start WCW Raw to make it an equal footing, which Bruce has obviously signed off on in the past as well.
Right.
That doesn't come to fruition. And so when it doesn't, all you end up doing is the brand split, which is cool, but you totally F the pooch with the idea of having two separate brands because you lost faith in the second brand.
Yeah.
So Tony Khan has too much faith in one brand, and Vince had not enough faith in the other one.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. It's perplexing. It makes it's frustrating though as a wrestling fan.
And it's all relevant to today. That's what's so crazy is reading this, I see all these allegories of what's happening even today with a different company. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep. So true.
Wow, man. That leads us to the King of the Ring. So Dave's write-up is, it's so perplexing because it seems so simple. WWF versus WCW is, at least at first, an easy natural rivalry. Started off as a shoot. It's built for 13 years and was a very nasty public fight during most of that period. Of course, it would have been better if WCW was never off television, didn't lose its audience, but done correctly, it still has the chance to be the biggest program of all time. But the King of the Ring for the Meadowlands in East Rutherford, New Jersey, the so-called kickoff featuring the first in-ring shot, DDP versus The Undertaker, ended up so disappointing from every standpoint. The show had a main event where the Office clearly gave up on two of the participants weeks before the match, after 2 weeks of which, if nothing else, temporarily turned things around from a morale standpoint and brought the crowd heat and match quality way up. And the King of the Ring tournament, which in past years anchored the show, was reduced to largely an afterthought. So was the first confrontation. Obviously, nobody takes WCW seriously yet. Its fans are gone. So, King of the Ring, June 24th, 2001, came to us from the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey. It had 17,770 fans in the crowd for the go-home pay-per-view before the biggest angle pay-per-view in company history. The show had 36% thumbs up, 43.1% thumbs down, 20.9% thumbs in the middle. The best match was Shane McMahon versus Kurt Angle. Worst match was The Undertaker versus DDP. John, your review.
I would 1000% say that Dave is so right. Dave was on the nail here with this show because it doesn't make a lot of sense. So DDP makes his way to the ring from the crowd, and it's revealed on the go home episode of SmackDown right before this show that he was Sarah's stalker. And if you want to kill a guy, make him a stalker. He said for him to become a star in the WWF, he needed to go for the biggest star, and that was Undertaker, and he was going to be sitting at Raw tomorrow night in MSG and with a Make Me Famous sign.
What a nerd.
I know, right? Heyman reports that Jericho and Benoit are possibly negotiating to join WCW. So our first match is the semifinals of the King of the Ring. It is Kurt Angle, who this is not the first time you're going to see Kurt Angle on this show in a wild turn of events here. Kurt Angle, he's your reigning King of the Ring champion versus Christian. Kurt Angle suffered a concussion during this match, allegedly, but Kurt wins and he moves on to your finals.
3-star match. They gives this one 3 stars.
It wasn't bad. It's just crazy to hear that he was concussed, considering what happens later on in the show.
Right.
Backstage with Stone Cold, the coach asked Steve what his thoughts are, or if Benoit or Jericho wins tonight against him, they're taking the title to WCW. He doesn't really care about that, blows it off, and they run the package for Undertaker and DDP, and Heyman interviews DDP ringside. So this is a thing you're going to see throughout this show. They're going to cut to DDP sitting ringside. DDP is talking, and footage of DDP at a restaurant is airing on screen as if someone was following him. And there's a ton of screen time here for Uncle Dally. Edge and Rhino is your other semifinal King of the Ring match. This one was pretty good, not bad. Is not as good as the first match, but Edge advances, and we have Edge and Kurt Angle as your King of the Ring final.
2.5 stars here from Dave.
Backstage, we have Spike, who doesn't want to reveal his tag team partner as it is a big surprise, but the Dudleys call Spike a disappointment. Jericho is interviewed by Taz of all people. This is kind of exciting. He asks him if he wins, is he going to WCW? Jericho says that they have a true boss in Shane, but he doesn't reveal what his intentions are. The Dudleys versus Spike and the surprise partner. Surprise! It's gotta be Kane. But they don't win. The Dudleys retain the World Tag Team Champions.
So 2.25 stars from that one from Dave.
They go ringside again to Uncle Dally. They show more footage of him being followed, and he gets even more pissed off at Undertaker.
Dave says, I think the page is growing older with every segment that they went to him. And man, did I explode reading that.
Oh my God. Billy Gunn is at WWF New York, which is crazy because 2 years earlier, which we're going to be covering here in 2 short weeks on the Podski, we're covering King of the Ring, and he was your King of the Ring winner in 1999. Edge and Kurt are your King of the Ring finals. Kurt tries to make Edge just give him the crown. Christian came down to distract the ref, but it almost costed his partner Edge the match. Edge took out the ref by accident with a spear, and Angle got the ankle lock on Edge. Edge taps, but there's no ref. Shane hops into the ring. He spears Kurt Angle. Edge hits the Impaler and becomes your King of the Ring for 2001.
3-star match here from Dave.
Taz asks Benoit about the WCW rumors, and Benoit shuts them down. Jeff Hardy defends the lightweight title against X-Pac. Hardy retains after the match was restarted when Jeff's foot was on the rope for a kickout.
2.25 stars here.
Commissioner Regal is in his office, and he's interrupted by Steve Austin, who calls Vince asking if he's heard the rumors about WCW and to get to the show immediately. But guess what? We're back to DDP again. He gets so upset. He hops into the ring. He calls out Undertaker. The camera starts panning on the Tron, and it turns, and it's Sarah who's been following DDP. The Undertaker comes down, starts to beat the hell out of DDP for way too long. Sarah keeps filming the beating, but DDP ends up escaping through the crowd, and that was your first big match of the Invasion angle.
Yeah, Dave gives this one a 0.5 star. Says the non-match with the Undertaker versus Page was up next. People popped for the first punch, and that was pretty much it. Page's Terry Funk comedy bumps and a serious heat program just seemed out of place. As far as the first physical confrontation between WWF and WCW, which it was, it couldn't have been planned out any worse.
Was not good. But match of the night is coming, and it is Kurt Angle versus Shane McMahon. Yes, Kurt Angle lost your King of the Ring finals. He comes back out to face Shane McMahon. And yes, this is the match that you're thinking of from King of the Ring. This is the match where Kurt nearly kills Shane with the glass pane, and it really isn't glass. They expected it to be glass, but the props guy swapped out the sugar glass for plexiglass because he was afraid the pyro was going to break the sugar glass. So Kurt tries to put him through one time. He doesn't go through. He does eventually go through, but then they try to throw him through the middle pane, the opposite direction, and it looked even more devastating. I don't know how Shane didn't break his neck in this process. Back in the ring, Curtis hitting Shane with the wooden board, but then he uses it as a platform for a super angle slam off the top rope for the win. And I guarantee you that is your match of the year for 2001.
4 stars from Dave, man. And 4 stars in 2001. That's a big deal.
It is. So we're at the main event, which is Austin versus Jericho versus Chris Benoit for the WWF title. I have 2 nuggies for you here. Benoit injured his neck a few weeks back in the Triangle Ladder match on SmackDown, where it was required to have surgery. He did not get the surgery. He kept going full schedule here. However, after this match, he does end up getting the surgery. And that's really crazy considering everything that happens later on.
Right.
But my second nugget is in the build to this match, after Benoit injured his neck, Steve puts Benoit in a crossface on Raw from Calgary, where they recreated the screwjob spots. If you recall from the Backlash 04 show, where the fans were booing because they thought that they were going to screw Benoit over retaining that title, well, guess what? They did it here in 2001. So they did it in 97, they did it in 2001, but they didn't do it in 2004.
And that harkens back to that Owen show where Dave said that, oh, this was an angle that they'd be talking about forever, and they'd do, for 30 years, and they did it for 30 years, man.
Literally have. If Austin loses, his association with Vince is over. So for the match, we get a rare Austin getting stunnered in this match. Chris Benoit gives Stone Cold Steve Austin the stunner. This match is insanely hard hitting. Austin hits 2 superplexes off the top rope. Benoit German Austin 5 straight times. Jericho puts Austin in the walls while Benoit has him in the crossface. Austin taps, but the ref can't determine who the winner is. Benoit and Jericho face off, but Booker T comes in from the crowd, attacks Austin as he gives Austin the scissors kick, throws him onto the desk, and he legitimately injures Austin. Meanwhile, Benoit backdrops Jericho off the top rope, knocks himself out as Austin rolls into the ring for the cover. He retains as your WWF champion.
3 3/4 stars, and the invasion is in full swing. The main event of this 2-show saga between WWF and WCW for the invasion show is here. So we gave you all the goods in and around the last Nitro, but now we're going to skip forward again. And now we are going to be the week of the show, because there's still a lot of meat left on the bone here that we can unpack and grill up in the future. We're going to save that for later on. So we did yada yada over a lot, but my God, there's still a lot there. We went through a lot today, and there's still a lot there. So John, before we get to the Invasion pay-per-view, you watched the go-home shows. So would you please take us through what you saw?
Yes, and to reiterate what you just said, we could literally come back and do this as a revisited playlist if we want to. There's just so much to cover here that we literally don't have time, and this could be like a 10-part series that we could do here on the show. But
you got that right.
For the Raw Invasion Go-Home show, this show was literally revolved around Vince being able to convince Steve Austin to turn into his old self, because without that Stone Cold, they cannot defeat WCW ECW on their own. So the show opens at the Friendly Tap, which is Timmy White's bar, ref Timmy White. That bar is 15 minutes away from the building, and they mention this so many times throughout the show. Austin is sitting at the bar with Deborah. Vince shows up to the Friendly Tap later in the show. He pleads with Austin, and he hopes that he can come to the show tonight. Timmy White eventually shows up beside Austin. He gives him a beer on the house and says he knows he's going to make the right decision. We go back later on in the show where Team WWF looks like this lame town hall meeting. It looks so dead. JBL says they need to get knee deep into somebody's ass. Undertaker steps in whenever Vince mentions we don't have our star, Steve Austin, and Undertaker steps in and says, I'm tired of hearing about it, and they're going to find out who Phony Tough is and who Crazy Brave is. And this is where we get the Brooklyn Brawler wheeling in classy Freddie Blassie in the wheelchair. Freddie Blassie rallies the troops and says there comes a time when every man must fight for what he believes in. Now's the time to stand up and fight.
Look, man, I can get behind this because Freddie Blassie did promo voice for Mania 20, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that guy got it. Like he can get you going. So as corny as this is, that actually sounds pretty cool to have him be the one that ends up being the troop rallier here.
So the camera immediately cuts to Austin sitting at the bar contemplating his decision. He finally leaves the friendly tap. The main event is the Brothers of Destruction versus Rhino and DDP. Classic WWF ending with brands brawling at the end of the show. Stone Cold shows up from in the parking lot, clears his path to the ring. The glass shatters and Austin ends up clearing the ring. And this was, if you want to talk about pops, go to this show because that is one of the most insane pops you'll ever see on a Raw. But the show ends with Freddie being escorted out of the building by Brooklyn Brawler. And he's stopped by Steph and Shane, where Steph says Freddie and the WWF have something in common. They're both about to die.
Oh my God. That's so WWF.
It is.
Hashtag that's so WWF.
So that takes us to a few days later, Thursday Night Smackdown, July 19th, 2001. They immediately play a recap of everything that happened on Raw with a great video package. There is really nothing of note on this show until Austin hits Vince over the head with the guitar before the main event. Austin and Angle versus Rhino and Booker T is the main event. So we have a tag team match for the main event. Austin hits the ring, starts to open a can of whoop ass, but then DDP comes across the Tron as he's kidnapped Deborah in the trunk of his car, and he's going to leave the building. Undertaker immediately jumps DDP before he can leave, but the WCW helps DDP. Austin finally does fight his way to DDP, but he gets away. Austin steals the nearby limo. Meanwhile, back in the ring, Angle is still in the match. He's getting his ass beat down by Rhino. Team WWF and WCW, they're still brawling backstage. The Dudleys put Angle through a table as WCW and ECW stand tall in the ring. Mongoose, we're finally here. 2.5 hours of audio, 40 pages of notes, dozens of hours of Peacock consumption. We have made it to the main event, the Invasion. Would you please lay out the silverware, lay out the plates and the napkins, serve us, baby. Give us your lead in for Invasion.
Absolutely. So the WWF Invasion pay-per-view came to you live from on July 22nd, 2001. The Observer readers gave this show 53.6% thumbs up, 21.3% thumbs down, 25.1% thumbs in the middle. The best match was RVD versus Jeff Hardy. The worst match was Big Show, Billy Gunn, and Albert versus Sean Stasiak, Canyon, and Hugh Morris. Somehow, Earl Hebner and Nick Patrick finished second in this poll. Like I don't know how that was a thing, but it was a thing.
Buckle up.
All right. So the Invasion pay-per-view on 7/22 from the Gund Arena in Cleveland appears to have been a major success based on three things happening. One, ECW is injected into the interpromotional angle. Two, the booking of the interpromotional angle, once head writer Stephanie McMahon and Paul Heyman was involved as characters, suddenly got inspired. And three, they gave fans what they wanted. The Steve Austin that sold tickets. Preliminary indicators such as attendance at the famous players' theaters in Canada, as compared with usual shows, volume of feedback, and television ratings from 7/23, which is a 5.35 rating, their best number since April of that year, are all positive signs of a turnaround. But regarding point 3, then it was taken away. As a show, it was just that, a show. One great match, a good main event, a few average, slightly better than average, and a few bad matches underneath. More bad than good, but it was sold as a one-match show. The two most important things about the show were Kurt Angle getting over as a top babyface, which seemed to have been accomplished, and the turn of Austin back heel after 6 days. John, table is set, brother. Take us through the show.
Well, it's a really interesting point that you said about the Gund Arena, because that is where the simulcast, where the Raw is War was. It was in the.
Oh, you're right about that.
And it ends here at the Invasion.
Didn't even think about that. Good point.
So Jim Ross welcomes us in for a night that will change the wrestling industry forever. The set is split by walkways from the WWF on the right and WCW, ECW on the left, which I thought was really interesting. It's a really cool set. First match is Edge and Christian versus Lance, Storm, and Mike Awesome. The finish of this match was awesome, but Mike Awesome had Edge in the Awesome Bomb, but Christian speared Awesome, and Edge fell on top of him for the cover and the win. The WWF is on the board for the first win of the night.
Dave said the match had its ups and downs, some sloppiness early, but built well to the near falls near the end. 2.5 stars.
Vince is in his office and Commissioner Regal lets him know that the old Stone Cold has returned, and Vince compares this somehow to the Revolutionary War.
Of course.
Yeah. Next, we have Nick Patrick versus Earl Hebner in a referee match with special guest referee Mick Foley. Nick Patrick got to strut that ass here as he showed off a lot here with a baseball sliding kick. The WCW refs ended up attacking Earl Hebner on the outside, but Mick Foley kicked them all out of ringside. Earl Hebner ends up winning the match, and with what I think is a spear, but it looked like a shoulder tackle. Earl looked like a disaster here, but Earl gets the win.
I have short enough that it wasn't that bad, but in hindsight, there was no reason for it. No rating. Not even a dud, just no rating.
Just no rating. They show a promo for the first season of Tough Enough, which is interesting. I enjoyed that first season of Tough Enough. Deborah is in catering with Sarah, still shaken up by her abduction by DDP on SmackDown. Both are confident, though, that Team WWF will prevail. Our third match of the night is the APA versus Palumbo and O'Hare in a non-tag team title match. I don't understand, because APA is World Tag Team Champions. Palumbo and O'Hare are WCW Tag Champions. Titles aren't on the line here. This starts off as a brawl. O'Hare shows off some great athleticism, but it really comes off as rushed and sloppy. In true APA fashion, Bradshaw wins with a clothesline from hell on Palumbo, and now the WWF is up 3-0.
Dave says, for what in another era would have been such an important deal, this was really nothing. 1 star.
Vince is in his office where Jericho calls Heyman a big white Shrek, and the WWF is going to get even with WCW tonight. Our fourth match is Billy Kidman versus X-Pac, but Billy Kidman is backstage getting a pep talk from Shane and Steph and also Paul Heyman. Their match is the light heavyweight champion versus the cruiserweight champion. Again, these titles are not on the line. What is the point of being champions? This is one of the better matches of the night. I felt there was some really cool spots, like the baseball sliding bulldog out of the ring that Kidman did. Pac caught a diving Billy Kidman from the top rope into an X Factor. Billy Kidman ends up getting the win here, though, with a shooting star press as WCW finally gets on the board. It's 3-1 WWF.
Dave says X-Pac was still booed, even on the WWF team, so we're at X-Pac heat here, and played heel from the start. The word on Kidman was always that he desperately needed a new ring outfit. Now that he's got one, he still does, as those biker shorts are so 4 years ago. Nothing wrong with the match, but nothing compared with Kidman's matches on WCW pay-per-view events. 2 stars.
Oh, my. Our fifth match of the night is Commissioner William Regal versus Raven. Taz interferes with a suplex on Regal that gives Raven the opening that he needs to hit the DDT for the win. And WCW ECW gets back-to-back wins, and now it's 3-2.
Dave says the match didn't get over at all. The crowd was dead except for boring chants, and in the ring, it was a major styles clash. 1/4 star.
Yeah, was not good. Vince gives the Brothers of Destruction a pep talk, but he ends up reminding Taker of DDP, and Taker grabs Vince by the throat and says he's going to see the best Undertaker they've ever seen tonight. Match 6 is the hodgepodge match. This is the worst match of the night. It's Big Show, Billy Gunn, and Albert, who's your IC champion here, versus Shawn Stasiak, Hugh Morris, and Canyon. The match starts off with a triple press slam by the WWF guys. Stasiak hits a reverse DDT on Billy Gunn, and Hugh Morris gets the pin for WCW. So we're all tied up here, 3-3. Big Show afterwards hands out a choke slam to Hugh Morris and the alley-oop to Canyon. So I guess we eventually get to go over here at the end.
Dave says the fans didn't seem to care about Gunn, who did a heel turn and didn't register. They didn't know how to take Albert since he's on TV as a heel, and he just gave that 1/4 star.
Booker T is backstage with Shane, and we're getting another pep talk. Regal tells Tajiri to go kick Taz's ass. So our 7th match is Taz versus Tajiri. These guys had a pretty fun match considering the last couple matches we've had here. Tajiri spits the mist into Taz's eyes to get the win for WWF. So now it's WWF 4, WCW ECW 3.
Dave says Taz looks slow and rusty, but still throws a mean suplex. 1.75 stars.
The Hardys are backstage talking when RVD hits Matt with a chair and runs away. We hurry up and shoot back to WWF New York as Hardcore Holly is ripping the shirt off of a fan because it's a WCW shirt. Go figure. Finally, we get the first title match of the night. The first and only title match you're going to see here on this show, although we've already seen all the champions. Jeff Hardy defends his hardcore title against RVD. However, this is match of the night. RVD does a moonsault off the barricade in a spinning back kick to Jeff. Jeff does a sunset power bomb off the apron to the floor, it looked rough for RVD. Jeff grabs what looks like to be a 50-foot ladder. He climbs to the top like he's going to do a swanton off of it. RVD pushes it over and Jeff falls to the floor. RVD hits a Van Daminator on the ramp. That's really, really cool. RVD hits a frog splash, which looks like he jumped from the rafters from the wind. The way that they shot this angle was really awesome. So WCW, ECW evens it up at 4-4. Vince gives Kurt Angle a pep talk, which is great work by Angle here, and he really came off as an awesome babyface.
Do you need to say that for that last match, the only note is that Dave said that was easily the show stealer. 4 stars on that one.
We do have a Brawl and Panties tag team match that we're just going to skip over, but Trish and Lita win, making it 5-4 for the WWF. And so they did not say this during the show, but if you count the dark match that happened before the show, it's technically 5-5 tied up going into the main event, which is next, because Chavo beat Scotty 2 Hotty. So the main event is going to decide it all. The inaugural Brawl, DDP, Booker T, Rhino, and the Dudleys versus Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, and the Brothers of Destruction. This was a very long match. Everyone got their shit in, but it all builds to the point in the match where Shane hits Vince with the belt. Angle throws Shane out. Angle gives Booker the angle slam, has him in the ankle lock. Booker is tapping, but there's no ref. Austin slides in, hits Angle over the head, who is his own teammate, gives Angle the stunner, puts Booker on top for the win. Austin turned heel on McMahon, and WCW ECW wins the show.
Man, you reading through that sounds a lot like bloodline matches.
Yeah, it is. Very much.
Long, big star power, interference.
Yep.
Screwy finish.
Oh, yeah.
100%. But you know what? You know what, though, dude? Still gets over here in 2024.
it still gets over.
So, yeah, so there's that. Dave says everyone worked hard. This was good, but not the caliber of most WWF main events. Austin and Angle in particular got huge reactions when they came out. Vince, Shane, Paul Heyman, and Stephanie were all brought out to ringside, but until the finish, none played a part in the match. Austin didn't look good as far as moving early, but seemed to get into it as the match got going. He picked up his spots and actually did more than I figured he would. 3.5 stars.
Well, that only makes sense because he was injured from Booker T at King of the Ring.
Thank you for Sagan, because I have one more little tidbit here from the issue at the time. So Dave says that the end result of the first Austin turn at WrestleMania less than 4 months ago was a downturn in most every facet of business, ratings, merchandise, attendance, and pay-per-view all dropped, and in most cases significantly. We talked the last show about this, that was the end of the Attitude Era, right? The tease of turning him back turned things around remarkably fast in conjunction with the strong television main angle. Why he turned back, especially in a business where over the past few years, as evidenced by people like Austin, Bill Goldberg, Sting, and Ric Flair, the turning a popular face heel often doesn't give him heat, but negates his box office value. Fans often simply won't pay to boo at somebody that they don't feel like booing, so they stay home or don't watch. So right there, he's nailing it back in, saying, stop this.
Yes.
Like let him be a good guy.
Yes.
There are a few reasons. Unlike the first time Austin turned, he had no opponents except for resurrecting an old feud with The Undertaker, and the company failed to pull the trigger on creating new opponents, instead focusing on the Power Trip vignettes, which turned out being a ratings-killing program, and now he is loaded with opponents. Austin had what should be big money programs lined up with Rock and Triple H, and with Angle's turn, a third program, not to mention The Undertaker still in that position if they need something in the quick event of an injury, since their last program was left open-ended. The heel side, due to the interpromotional angle, was being headed by Booker T, DDP, and Rhino. Clearly, from a marquee value standpoint, it was totally unbalanced. Second, for the main storyline, the idea that ECW, WCW stole the WWF Championship is a strong program. The Austin turn had more impact than the other possibilities, which were Angle and Chris Jericho, since the show basically had to end with ECW, WCW winning the last match due to a member on the team turning. So then this is what I thought was interesting. He says, clearly, this is being booked as a copy of the NWO with a very familiar first angle when Hulk Hogan turned. Of course, there was a huge difference when Hulk Hogan in 1996 turned, when nobody wanted to cheer him anymore, versus Steve Austin in 2001. On paper, it's the right move for balancing faces and heels and having a series of marquee heel versus face main event programs. The risk is that Austin's sudden invigoration, which was one of the two key reasons for this show having so much interest, is negated by being in a position where he didn't draw before, although he didn't have as strong an angle, which should be alleviated by the return first of Rock and then of Triple H. As it turned out, Austin did the main event with 3 broken bones in his back and 2 broken bones in his hand, courtesy of the bump that he took at the King of the Ring show when Booker T threw him over the announce table. Austin was x-rayed after the show, didn't reveal any broken bones, but he was in continual pain, particularly in his back, and when doing just about anything physical. Further tests were done on 7/19, which revealed the 5 breaks. He had breaks of the L2, L3, and L4 bones, which are not weight-bearing bones, so he was able to gut it out on the pay-per-view. The current estimate is that he will make an active wrestling return in 8/5.
It makes that all makes sense. And really, that's kind of the end of Stone Cold Steve Austin, really, because we see him at WrestleMania 18 with Scott Hall. He doesn't really do much. He does the really big trilogy match with The Rock at 19. And then really there's nothing else left for Stone Cold. He becomes the general manager of Raw. And basically this entire Invasion angle, which right now seems to be business-wise a success, is looked back on as a disaster. for multiple reasons, and that we've already laid out here with because they can't bring everybody in. The shows weren't that great. They didn't have a lot of good guys. Looking back on it was a lot of fun here, but what are your thoughts on the Invasion?
So I thought it was interesting to read the contemporaneous account of the sense made for why you would want Austin to turn and be the guy. Because in reading all of that, dude, that makes all the sense in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Programs, you have all this. What didn't follow through was the execution of WCW Raw and WWF Smackdown.
Yep.
That was seriously it. I feel like if that came to fruition and if they did go all in, we would be looking at this really different. Because even though the show itself was a little bit of a letdown, you going through all of that, and even though we just read off a bunch of quarter star matches or whatever, at least it culminated with main event guys from one company versus main event guys from another company. The show's 5-5. There's a big turn at the end. Like they did check all of the boxes. And so they actually shouldn't be as dragged as they are, except what happened after. That's what I think. That's what I think. Just reading, that's what I think.
Yeah, and everything that happens after, I'm sure we'll cover sometime here on the Podski, but that is our part 1 and part 2 of the Invasion. We hope that you all enjoyed. This one was a special one for you, Uncle Jamie, the A1 Day 1 listener. This one was for you. We're back to the regularly scheduled programming next week with Bad Blood 2004. I'm really excited to talk about this one. We got to thank Teddy Mongoose here because he read a lot with Mongoose Reads. This was a really condensed schedule this week, but we're back to the normal shows next week and to the future. So with that, we thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Podski.